All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you guys for being here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to do this work for you guys. So just some introductions. My name is Anthony, and I will be talking to you guys about short-term rentals. This is Maria. She'll be talking to you guys about initiatives addressing homelessness. This is Leah, and she'll be talking about policy implications of affordable housing. And then this is Marcellus, and she'll be talking about inclusionary zoning and zoning reform. So for our research question that we'll try to answer in this presentation is, how does new development and the short-term rental market impact the displacement of residents in Los Angeles? And what solutions can address both affordable housing and homelessness issues in Los Angeles?
So first, we're going to start off by talking about how we define affordable housing. So housing is typically considered affordable when individuals pay no more than 30% of their income to rent. And there's different categories of affordable housing that are marked by income levels in comparison to the area median income. So we have our 4 different levels up there on the screen. We have moderate income, which is 80 to 120% of the AMI. We have low income, which is 50 to 80%. We have very low income, which is 30 to 50%. And then we have extremely low income, which is 30% and lower.
All right, so I'll be talking to you guys now about short-term rentals and the role they play in limiting housing supply, contributing to housing cost increases, and increasing eviction rates in Los Angeles. So to start off, I wanted to talk about tourism and gentrification in Los Angeles. So as defined by the UCLA Law Review, tourism has long been recognized as creating a specific kind of gentrification. So this process involves an area in Los Angeles will experience an influx of tourists, which creates an increased demand for tourist accommodations and attractions, which then encourages stakeholders like gentrifiers and city officials to increase efforts to gentrify areas to make it more palatable for tourists. And then in turn, that creates housing price increases, which leads to the eventual displacement of low-income residents out of the area. So what role do short-term rentals play in this phenomenon, or STRs for short? Well, tourists usually create a demand for cost-effective, convenient, and flexible accommodations. And so that's something they wouldn't usually find in usual hotels. So for example, on platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo, it's very easy for tourists to like book reservations, or it's like cancel. It's very convenient for visiting new areas for them. And because of that, that creates a demand for short-term rentals. And in turn, because you have people like landlords who are wanting to profit off of this market, they'll convert long-term rentals into short-term rentals, which decreases the supply of long-term rentals in Los Angeles. So how do short-term rentals limit affordable housing supply? Well, according to Better Neighbors LA, about 6,000 to 10,000 units have been removed from the market in Los Angeles and turned into short-term rentals. And because 54% of Los Angeles County residents are renters, meaning that more than half of them depend on rental properties as a source of housing, this creates a higher risk for people to experience housing displacement. And as a result, communities of color are also impacted disproportionately. And just looking at some renter demographics in LA to talk about how communities of color are impacted disproportionately. Well, looking at this first figure right here, you can see that Latinos make up the highest percentage of renters in Los Angeles, with 50 being that 55.3%. And taking a look at the percentage of Black renters in Los Angeles, while they make up a smaller percentage compared to other demographics, you can see here in the second figure that they make up the highest percentage of renters who experience housing cost burdens. So about 60% of Black renters experience housing cost burdens, whether that be moderate rent burden or severe rent burden. So how do short-term rentals also contribute to housing cost increase? Well, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, about a 1% increase in an Airbnb listing can equate to about a $9 increase in rents and a 1,800 increase in housing prices. And according to another article by USA Today, if housing prices were to go up by 6%, a platform like Airbnb would be responsible for 0.8% of that 6%. While that does not account for the entirety of that 6%, that's almost 1% of the 6% increase, which is relatively high. So looking at the effects of short-term rentals in specific areas in Los Angeles, also this is in kilometers because the source was using kilometers. Properties within 5 kilometers of the Hollywood Walk of Fame experience about a 14.7 house price effect, while properties that are closer to the Hollywood Walk of Fame, about like 2.5 kilometers, experience a 20% house price effect, meaning the closer that you get to the tourist hotspot, the higher the house price effect. And additionally, in the last 10 years, nominal housing prices within 5 kilometers of Hollywood have increased by more than 40%. And also looking at price effects on beach towns, given that that's another tourist hotspot for Los Angeles, with areas within 2.5 kilometers of a beach area, housing cost increases are estimated to be around 4.8%. And also looking at like a specific beach area, Santa Monica, if their city council were to abandon their regulations on short-term rentals, their housing price increases would go up by 2.5%. And how do short-term rentals influence evictions? Well, so as stated by Better Neighbors LA, there's a positive correlation between evictions in Los Angeles and Los Angeles short-term listings as of 2024. And this correlation coefficient is 0.49%. Well, and the correlation coefficient here means that 49% of outcome variability in evictions is due to short-term rentals. While this is not a super high coefficient, given that housing is a complex issue, it is a strong indicator that tells us a part of the story for why evictions are happening in Los Angeles. And also 96% of eviction notices were for missed rent payments, with the average debt being around $3,774. So given that STRs contribute to a lot of housing cost increases, so areas that are saturated with short-term rentals in turn create more increases for housing costs, which then creates rent burden for renters who are most likely evicted because they missed their rent payments. And at the same time, landlords are also motivated to evict tenants from long-term rental units because they're looking to convert these units into short-term rentals that'll make them more money. So what has been done to regulate short-term rentals in Los Angeles? So in December 2018, Los Angeles adopted the home sharing ordinance. And this basically just allows short-term rental hosts to engage in home sharing, provided that they follow a set of requirements and register with the city. And violating the HSO can result in things like citations and fines. But even with the HSO in effect, as of the summer of 2021, about a third of short-term STR listings were illegal. And then in 2022, it jumped to about 45% of STR listings in Los Angeles being illegal. So this is an indicator that landlords are finding ways to, finding loopholes around the HSO. And then at the same time, illegal short-term rental listings are defined as like units that don't adhere to the HSO requirements, they don't register with the city, or they use fake license numbers to register with the city. So what are the limitations of enforcing the HSO? Well, according to an article about the LAS, LA has not responded accordingly to the amount of illegal STR listings in the city, which has resulted in a loss of about 300 million in unenforced HSO violation fines. And this lack of enforcement is attributed to a lack of resources and a lack of staff allocated to enforcing the HSO. So what does enforcing the HSO look like? Well, I'm looking at Irvine as a case study. When Irvine put a ban on short-term rentals in residential zones, this led to a 3% decrease in long-term rents. And this totals about a reduction of 80.7 million in annual total rental spending by renters in Irvine. And I will be passing it to Maria to talk about different initiatives addressing homelessness.
Okay, so I decided my research efforts to focus on different initiatives addressing homelessness within the last 4 years. The first one is Inside Safe, which is based throughout the city of Los Angeles, and it is current. The second is Project Room Key, which was California's statewide and ran at its peak from 2020 to 2022. And the last is the Housing Focus Encampment Assistance Link, also known as HEAL, which is ran in Austin and is current. It's also important to note that all 3 of these initiatives follow the Housing First model, which is basically the idea that in order to address the issues caused by homelessness, such as drug issues, the encampments, crime rates, those cannot be addressed until the homeless individuals are housed. Starting with Inside Safe. Inside Safe is an initiative being ran by Mayor Karen Bass in an effort to close the encampments throughout the city of LA. And so the process is basically addressing the encampments, getting them into interim housing, and then moving them into permanent housing. So how does Inside Safe work? There are about 4 stages. The first is assessment. The mayor and the city officials address which encampment they want to focus on for each stage. And so once they find an encampment they want to focus on, they do outreach. So there's a field intervention team, also known as FIT. And those are individuals that have a background in policy, health advocacy, public health, homelessness. And they end up going out into the encampments and they interact with the individuals living in the encampments. They get to know them better, their wants, their needs. And then FIT begins to collaborate with other organizations like the USC Street Medicine Team, furthering their understanding of what the individuals would need. And last is move-in day. So that's where all of the city officials come together, Los Angeles Department of Transportation, Los Angeles Sanitation. They all come together in an effort to move the individuals within the pre-assessed encampment to their interim housing, which is oftentimes a motel. So how does Inside Safe operate internally? Inside Safe operates on a pyramid hierarchy. You have Mayor Bass at the top. She's the one that's spearheading the initiative as a whole. She's giving the roles and the tasks to all of the other organizations. And then you have FIT next. So they go out into the street, they work with the individuals, and then they end up furthering their collaboration with other organizations, like I mentioned. And the last is the long-term housing and support. This is a pyramid hierarchy because there are clear ties and responsibility and decision-making that flow from top to bottom, and there's high codependency between each level. So how successful has Inside Safe been? For the purpose of my research, I decided to consider an initiative successful if an individual was on how many individuals were permanently housed, considering that is the end goal for all of these initiatives. So for all of the individuals participating in Inside Safe since its creation, 64.3% were moved inside, meaning they were moved into interim housing. 21.6% moved, they left Inside Safe. They either left and went back onto the streets. They moved into housing. Not housing. They moved into like a mental health space. And then permanently housed was only 14.1%. So if you compare the permanently housed to the individuals back on the street, only 21% of the individuals within Inside Safe were permanently housed and 33% wound up back on the street. Next is Project Room Key, which was an initiative established in March of 2020 and ran at its peak until about the end of 2022. The whole purpose of Project Room Key was to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 throughout high-risk individuals, in this case, homeless individuals throughout the streets of California as a whole. It's important to note that Project Room Key was never intended to be a permanent solution or never meant to address homelessness. It was only meant to mitigate the spread of COVID, minimize the amount of deaths. However, it was successful in doing both, minimizing the spread and getting individuals housed. How did PRK work? Specifically looking at Los Angeles, there were smaller sites throughout Los Angeles, smaller PRK sites, which were managed by nurses, service providers, so individuals within the encampments throughout the city of LA. They were addressed, they were asked if they'd like to participate in PRK. A lot of them were weary in doing so, but they were offered a space with no requirements that they had to meet. And they were then moved into a PRK site. Oftentimes it was a motel or hotel room. And how did it operate? PRK also operated on a pyramid hierarchy. So each level interacted with each other and codepended on each other. So you had the city at the top, which they were in charge of finding out which motels and hotels they were able to lease from. They then worked with the hotels and motels in order to lease them and find out the charging, the cost that it would be. Then they ended up working with the Los Angeles Homelessness Services Authority. And so once they contracted with LAHSA then ended up subcontracting again to nonprofit organizations or service providers in order to oversee the PRK sites. How successful was PRK? So considering that PRK was never even meant to address homelessness or lower the amount of homeless individuals in the streets of Los Angeles, it was pretty successful. So out of all the individuals in the PRK throughout the state of California, 22% were permanently housed, 15% did end up back on the street, and there was a large number, 18%, which went to an unknown destination. So they either left PRK voluntarily, involuntarily, or another larger amount was 25%, which had to go to emergency housing in relation to their health. And the last is HEAL, which is based in Austin, Texas. So this is an initiative with the goal of closing dangerous encampments. And they want to move these, or they are moving these individuals into one of two shelters, the Northbridge or Southbridge shelter, getting them into their interim housing and then getting them connected to permanent housing solutions. How does HEAL work? There's actually a team that works on the ground that consists of multiple individuals. Some of them are police officers, paramedics, mental health professionals. Some of them are police officers, and they go out into the street, they identify the encampments, the individual at the encampments, again, offer their services and their aid, move them into temporary housing, and aid them in finding their long-term housing. So HEAL's a little bit differently because it operates on a little bit different than the other two initiatives because it follows a linear hierarchy. So there's a sequence of stages. So you have host that goes onto the ground. They end up finding the individuals. They end up relocating them to the next, which is crisis shelter, and they get their immediate support. So they're offering immediate health and well-being services, and then they're also connecting them to stable housing and long-term solutions. How successful has HEAL been? According to a 2022 report from Austin data portal, a total of 362 individuals had been housed at the time or had been moved to one of the two shelters, and 137 were permanently housed, meaning there was a 37.9 success rate at the time of the data collection. The last part of my research efforts, I wanted to understand exactly how people working in shelters here in LA feel about the initiatives, feel about the resources they're being offered. So Olivia Epp is a social worker at a homeless shelter. She's the one that's offering resources to individuals when they're brought to her shelter, giving them access to resources and working with them one-on-one. And she stated, having a top-down model, referring to the pyramid hierarchy, has been difficult, cannot give hope or information to clients and others from other organizations. Better communication between all of these cities and counties and organizations could have a lot more people housed. And then last was Alessandro H. So he's a director at another shelter here in LA, and he praises the housing first model and actually believes that Inside Safe has allowed more people to come out of the streets, and he can see that impact. Next, we handed it off to Leah.
Hi guys, my name is Leah. I'm going to be talking about some of the policy implications of various affordable housing solutions. So not just the policies themselves, but essentially how efficient were they at actually mitigating this crisis. So in terms of my research focus, I wanted to start with Invitation Homes, which is a corporate landlord which has over 10,000 homes across all of California. And then I also did a comparative analysis of Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10 in terms of both of the ways in which they're able to dynamically attack the housing crisis. And then I also got into the AFFH Act and the enforcement of that as well. Okay, so starting with Invitation Homes. So Invitation Homes is it's a after the 2008 housing crisis, this corporate landlord group went and essentially purchased a bunch of foreclosed properties in California, which has ultimately resulted in thousands of tenants being phased out, specifically Black and brown people in poor communities. As you can see here, the targeted neighborhoods of Invitation Homes, 62% of them were Black and Latino. And if you go through the statistics of the people who are being phased out of these homes, many of them have lower acquisitions of higher education, and they're in homes that are more likely to be foreclosed upon. And then, as you can see here, Invitation Homes has also kind of worked as a political power as well by contributing a lot of money and funding towards certain bills and propositions that are aimed to try and ease the affordable housing crisis in California. As you can see, they spent around $500,000 into no on Prop 33. And they also spent over $600,000 into no on Prop 21, which is a really important act that was aiming to update the Costa-Hawkins Act and maintain rent control throughout the state of California. And so in terms of the accountability mechanisms that, the state of California can take to try and protect residents and uphold affordable housing, we've seen movement on both the national and the statewide level. So on the national level, Invitation Homes has actually been in multiple class action lawsuits, but one of its most recent ones was for fee stacking, so excessive fees against tenants, and we saw this in various states, Arizona, Texas, and Florida. And then also on the statewide level, the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, had engaged in a class action settlement with Invitation Homes for unfair fee stacking as well, and also rent hikes and violating statewide tenant protection regulations. And ultimately, California is just setting a precedent of holding corporate Wall Street accountable. And I think movements like this is really helpful to try and ease the affordable housing crisis. And number one, protect tenants, especially those in vulnerable neighborhoods. And now I'm going to get into Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10. And I think the key overarching question of these two bills is, are we solving a housing crisis or an affordable housing crisis? And I kind of wanted to mitigate the difference between just building a bunch of more lots versus actually creating affordable housing that can reach out to underprivileged people living in California. So here I have a table just kind of comparing some of the key differences and the features of Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10. I think the key thing to pay attention to is the fact that for Senate Bill 9, it's a ministerial approval process, and for Senate Bill 10, it's voluntary. And so starting with the California Home Act, Senate Bill 9, it was a potentiality to construct 700,000 new units with affordable housing. But if we look at the adoption of Senate Bill 9 after it was passed, only 282 applications went through. And so there's clearly just a disconnect between the legislative intent and then the actual enforcement mechanisms. And so when observing why Senate Bill 9 wasn't able to pass, I wasn't able to help as many people as it intended to, I think one of the key issues here was the fact that these lots weren't necessarily forced to be affordable. And then going into Senate Bill 10, the Planning and Zoning Act, so it kind of aimed to reduce barriers for cities to zone for smaller low-cost housing developments. But once again, a key issue that we've seen in Senate Bill 10 is the fact that by bypassing public hearings, it violates various environmental protections. So as we can see in very high fire severity zones, we were seeing various issues of many tenants and communities having complaints over environmental issues in their neighborhoods as well. And by bypassing the CEQA, the Senate Bill 10, it's able to accelerate development by potentially sacrificing environmental safety at the same time. So once again, it is a double-edged sword. And then moving on to the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Act. So this was signed into legislation by Lyndon B. Johnson and then reinstated later. It aims to take a hands-on approach to solving segregation in California, specifically in high-cost neighborhoods, and make sure that there's a good amount of integration. But the key issue, though, is NIMBYism. I think that when it comes to addressing the California housing crisis head-on, it's not just about implementing the policies, but there are various communities who want to keep that purity and keep, they don't want multi-family housing down their street from them. They don't want them in their backyard, essentially. And so that's why Senate Bill 35 has been a really good mitigant as stepping forward and bypassing public hearings and being able to approve efficient housing solutions that ultimately will help more Californians. And a really good case study for this would be from Marin County, in which we had a 74-unit multifamily affordable housing project, which was approved by the county, and it had actually bypassed various town hall meetings. And so various citizens and various stakeholder groups were upset about the approval of this multifamily housing, but by being able to bypass the public town hall meetings, we were able to get this passed and get more people housed. And going from a more federal perspective of this all, in terms of the journey of the AFFH, the Trump administration did play a really large role in this, because obviously the rule was initially introduced in 2015, but in 2017, the Trump administration halted it in efforts to keep neighborhoods more segregated, especially in major metropolitan areas in California. And that's why it's really important for California state stakeholders to come in and have their own statewide enforcement mechanisms to be able to protect and ensure there's affordable housing for all. The Assembly Bill 686 was able to mandate AFFH compliance at state and local levels, which was a really efficient solution at being able to ensure that our neighborhoods are diverse and being able to reduce urban sprawl and metropolitan governance. And I'm going to be passing out to Marcel, who's going to be talking about exclusionary zoning.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about how we can promote affordable housing production through inclusionary zoning and zoning reform policies. So starting with inclusionary zoning, just a brief overview, it refers to programs that either require or incentivize a certain number of below market rate units to be built in new developments. And proponents of these types of programs often argue that it can be an effective means of producing below market rate housing, and that no public subsidies are required. And then on the other hand, critics often argue that it can discourage developers from building housing, and that it can increase the price of market rate housing, which typically happens if developers feel that they have to increase the price of their market rate units in order to make up for the profits lost on their affordable units. And so a way to mitigate the concerns of critics is to offer incentives and cost offsets to developers. And so an example of this is looking at a case study of San Francisco, IZ in San Francisco versus in Boston. And so in San Francisco, the majority of inclusionary zoning programs offer cost offsets, while in Boston, only about a third do. And then we see that in San Francisco, the implementation of inclusionary zoning did not correspond with an increase in housing prices, while the implementation of inclusionary zoning in Boston did correspond with an increase in housing prices. So this kind of shows the importance of density bonuses, reduced parking minimums, things like that, in mitigating the concerns that critics often have with this program. We can also look at inclusionary zoning across LA and Orange counties to help illustrate the same effect. And so a study done by a professor of urban planning at UCLA found that the majority of inclusionary zoning programs across LA and Orange counties do not correspond with higher housing prices within the jurisdiction, but the majority of these programs offer numerous cost offsets for developers. So looking specifically at inclusionary zoning within LA, we can start with the Transit-Oriented Communities Program, also known as TOC. And so there's two categories. There's the discretionary category and the by right permit category. And the difference between these two, discretionary requires a case-by-case review versus by right approval means that if a project just automatically goes through if it meets all of the zoning requirements. So TOC was implemented in September of 2017. And for this discretionary category, we have data from 2018 to 2022. And we see that there have been almost 29,000 approved units in that time span, with 6,380 of them being affordable, which means that about 22% of units produced have been affordable. Within the by right permit application category, we have data between 2017 and 2022. And we see that there have been a total of 8,736 total units produced between that time, with 2,250 of them being affordable, leading us to an affordability percentage of about 26%. We can also look at the housing produced by income level, and so to see which income level is best targeted by TOC. And so looking at the graph for discretionary, we see that the extremely low income level is at 47%, excuse me, with low income in second place at 43%, and then very low income in third place. And then we have for the by right permit category, we have low income being the vast majority, with extremely low income coming in second at 23%, and then very low income in third place, and then moderate income being just a small sliver of the pie. So this data just shows us that TOC does a very good job at targeting that extremely low income level, which is very rare for IC programs to do. We can also look at the density bonus ordinance, which is another voluntary program here, a voluntary inclusionary zoning program here in LA. And it is just the way that the city implements the state density bonus law. And so looking at data between 2015 and 2022, we see that there have been a total of 36,468 total units approved, with around just over 7,000 of them being affordable, which gives us an affordability percentage of about 20%. And so looking at housing produced by income level, we see that density bonus ordinance does a very good job at targeting the very low and the low income, but not so much the extremely low income. So the extremely low income is the orange, which is at the very bottom. And we see that the DB program has not done a very good job at producing housing for individuals within that category. So in a direct comparison of TOC and DB, we can see that for one, TOC has been able to deliver slightly more housing in less time, and that it has been able to add 1,000 more affordable units within a similar total housing output. So this tells us that TOC is building more housing faster, both general and affordable. And if we remember our comparisons of the income levels, we can see that TOC does a better job at targeting the extremely low income level group, while the density bonus ordinance targets more so the low income and the very low income. And many critics of inclusionary zoning programs often argue that it doesn't solve the root cause of the problem, which is exclusionary zoning. So we can look at zoning reform policies to see if they can play a role in being able to promote affordable housing production. So we can start with Minneapolis's 2040 plan, which was passed in 2020, and it eliminates single-family zoning by allowing for duplexes and triplexes on formerly single-family zoned lots, and it eliminates minimum off-street parking requirements citywide. We can also look at Oregon's zoning reform policies. And so starting in 2019, they've passed a series of land use reform laws. So in 2019, we get HB 2001, which is a ban on single family zoning. And then in 2021, we get SB 458, which states that the same jurisdictions that are that must ban single family zoning must now also allow for lot divisions. And then in 2022, we get the elimination of parking minimums near high frequency transit. And so we can compare Minneapolis and the 2040 plan there to Portland's implementation of the state reforms. And so a difficulty that cities often run into with zoning reform is the difficulty of building 2 or 3 units on land that was formerly zoned for single family homes and having to abide by the same like height requirements, size requirements that were intended for single family homes. And so Portland actually accounts for this issue by passing additional legislation that allows these new multi-unit homes to be larger, while Minneapolis does not account for this issue at all. And so this is a factor that can have a potentially large impact on the actual feasibility of building more homes using zoning reform policies. And so the thing with zoning reform, as Leah has mentioned, is that it targets more so building more housing production in general, not specifically affordable housing production. So we can look to Seattle's 2019 reforms of their ADU laws as a possible model that combines increased density with also targeting specifically affordable housing production. So in Seattle, in 2019, they reformed their ADU laws to allow for 2 ADUs per single family lot, but the second ADU must either be made available to low-income households and reserved for that purpose for 50 years, or it must meet green building standards. So this is a possible model that we could follow in order to have zoning reform policies, but also make sure that we're specifically targeting the production of affordable housing. So now we're going to go into some policy recommendations that we have. So we have 3 up there for you guys. The first is enhanced enforcement and regulatory oversight. So we have 3 prongs within this recommendation. The first is strengthening the enforcement of the home sharing ordinance. And we can do this by pushing the city to allocate more resources, more staff, more funding to this purpose. Second, although pyramid hierarchies have often been proven to be successful, increased oversight on organizations that utilize such a system might actually ensure higher levels of success. And then third, we can utilize regulatory oversight committees to ensure that localities are in policy compliance with affordable housing measures. And then our second recommendation is to collaborate with short-term rental platforms to ensure compliance. And so we can work with platforms like Airbnb and like Vrbo to ensure that hosts are abiding by local laws. And so if they're not, then we can ask the platform to take the property off until it's deemed legally operating, until it's registered, and then can be put back onto the platform. And then third, we have promote affordability through zoning reform. And so this can be done like what we've seen in Seattle by incentivizing or mandating affordability within zoning reform policies. And then this can allow us to grow specifically affordable housing supply through zoning reform. Thank you.
Okay, yay, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'll let you guys sit down so you can have a seat and then you guys can use your Q&A. I brought a couple council members with us. I think we get the city council member that needs to hear every single portion of what you're doing.
You guys, this was, it was before we got this.
Got questions? I mostly just want to say, could you keep doing your research? How do we get you to do that? First of all, in case you did not know, John handles our housing and land use department. I do administrative, but I am primarily responsible for problem properties in the city of LA. Properties that no one's taken action on, or we just haven't done enforcement. And that encompasses everything from tenants' rights, displacement, affordability, the homeless on the task force with the mayor, finding solutions to some of our problems, and short-term rental enforcement. So there's a problem here and nobody wants to take it, it wants it on my desk. So everything you spoke about today, all of it, I am working on in our office, and John certainly supervises an entire staff that does the same. So thank you for your contributions. I heard every word and you provided a lot of really good information. Your research is outstanding. So my first question is in the subject that we were first talking about regarding Santa Monica, if they had 0 short-term rental increases, if they got rid of the short-term rentals, it would increase housing prices. Could you please explain that to me, how we came to that conclusion?
I was just looking at what a paper was talking about. I know that Santa Monica, like, I guess like they operate a little differently, given like the way that their city works. But basically, they actually enacted a home sharing ordinance 3 years before the city of LA did. So they had that in effect for like almost 10 years now. So if they were to remove those regulations on those short-term rentals, housing price increases that are attributed to like the presence of short-term rentals would like increase by 2.5%.
So you're saying if they remove the regulations, not if they remove the ability to actually rent short-term
Yes, if they
rentals?
remove the regulations.
Yeah. Got it. Can I continue?
Please, roll.
I wanted to ask regarding the short-term rentals and the eviction rates that you talked about. Was this influenced, did you find in your research, by evictions, the number of evictions that you stated that were due to failure to pay the rent was surprisingly high for me compared to what I did with on short-term rental displacement. So my question was, did the data that you looked at for your presentation heavily rely upon data that was provided during the COVID pandemic? Would that have influenced the numbers?
So actually the data that I found for the eviction rates was for 2024. I found it from this organization, LA, Better Neighbors LA, and they're basically a coalition of like stakeholders. Yeah, they work with enforcing HSO. So they just have like on their website, they have like a lot of like reports regarding like LA's enforcement of HSO year by year. So I looked at the report for 2024 and that's what they said about just like eviction rates and the number of evictions.
Okay. Next one, SB 9 and 10, something I'm extremely familiar with.
Yes.
I worked on SB 8, drafting SB 8 and SB 330, and John and I actually were in this community very involved with what the consequence of SB 9 and 10 would be. I'm aware that we did not opt as the city of Los Angeles to implement SB 10 here, and that there was no affordability requirement in either SB 9 or 10. You talked about that there was a disconnect between the legislature and enforcement, okay? So to further that, I'd like your impression on whether or not you would say there was a disconnect between the legislature in Sacramento and the applicability of their laws and the financial realities in Los Angeles that would also have had an influence on SB 9 not producing affordable housing.
I think the issue was that there were no statewide enforcements mandating these new lots to be built to actually be affordable housing. I think the development of new luxury units, it might look good on paper, but in terms of actually housing people who have been displaced, it doesn't work. And I think also the issue with SB 9 was the fact that it was a ministerial approval process. And then with SB 10, I think the key issue was the fact that it was voluntary, adaptation, right? And so for a lot of the jurisdictions and counties who probably needed to implement SB 10, they opted not to. And so I think the issue with the bill's language was the fact that it essentially didn't really force the hand of various jurisdictions to actually follow through with the bill.
There's no affordability in the bill. right? No
Exactly.
requirement.
Exactly.
So
And that should be the key.
that would have been a legislative fix in effect.
Yes,
Require affordability in SB 9 and 10 and actually make SB 10 ministerial rather than voluntary.
yes.
So here's one for the entire group, and you guys did a great job. I'm proud to be an SC alum listening to you.
UCLA's good too, we just don't happen to have these four.
So obviously, we're dealing with some serious market and economic forces here, and we know, you guys can see where this trend is going, even around this school's community and the impact that it's had. So given that, people are not gonna stop coming to Los Angeles, we've got the World Cup and Olympics and all that stuff coming. What sort of things do you all see as strategies and opportunities for existing communities in Watts, South LA, East LA, et cetera? Given that there are these places, I know down the street from my house, Slauson and Crenshaw, where Nipwa Patty Spot, that's a major tourist attraction. The Watts Tower, same thing. What sorts of things or ideas do you all see would give existing communities an opportunity to take advantage of some of that economic influx from tourists, from economic development
While not
to
being
participate?
displaced.
Exactly,
While not being
that's really the
displaced.
key, is how do you continue the positive economic activity so that it benefits the people that are already here?
We've talked the Crenshaw corridor,
Mhm.
what they're gonna do is great, I have fear for the displaced.
Exactly, because that's, in a nutshell, that's what, when people say gentrification, that's what they're referring to, which is really economic displacement. Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think given that with the World Cup and the Olympics coming here, in terms of like the realm of short-term rentals, it'll definitely skyrocket with the influx of tourists. And I think that like LA should look to like, again, like the case study of Irvine, like possibly like maybe either banning or temporarily banning short-term rentals in residential
Oh, you're in
zones.
my area, right?
Just to protect these neighborhoods from the negative effects that come with the presence of short-term rentals.
So to address that, if John will allow me, when you're hosting the Olympics, you report to the International Olympic Committee with an agreement, a hosting agreement, and of course, we have city agreements. Those are a series of probably up to 14 other agreements. One complication here is that the International Olympic Committee has two major worldwide corporate sponsors. And as we know, hosting the Olympics, you don't want to upset the IOC or their sponsors. One is Visa International. You want to guess who the second one is? Bingo. And it expires at the end of the LA Olympics. Therefore, we're not going to look at doing anything to harm that International Olympic Committee sponsor. But I would love your feedback on something that I've recently proposed, and yeah, my head's on the chopping block for this. I'm trying to get discussions with the council. Well, in advance of the Olympics, what do you think would happen if we did a moratorium on the city of LA for short-term rentals in multifamily apartment buildings? Just, you didn't research it. I just want to hear all of you from your perspective. What do you think that would do? Basically, no, you can't rent out any apartment in this city for a period of time, restricted.
There'd be no Olympics. I mean, there would.
I'm not doing it during the Olympic period, I'm doing it beforehand to study it. But what do you think would be the real life living in your community effect of banning short-term rentals in apartment buildings so that they're only available to renters? In your local community, I'd like your feedback on that. Just your, this is obviously not part of your research. You're my test audience.
Don't everybody speak at once.
And you can always be honest with me. This is my first chance to get some community feedback and would love yours.
I personally don't have an idea of what that would look like, but I think that outside of like the the unit, it would force people to look back to hotels again. Looking for other options outside of short-term rental units. So maybe that might open up a new market or revive that hotel and hospitality market in Los Angeles as well.
And what do you think the effect would be upon availability of apartments or the rents?
I think availability would increase and affordability hopefully would increase as well.
I'll let you know when I need you to say that. Anybody else?
I can add on, I think okay, I'm unaware of just how many short-term rentals there are in LA. And also the neighborhoods that they're located in, I think matters. So like for affordability, if all these short-term rentals are mostly in like maybe wealthier areas, then affordable, like if they would be then made to like available to renters at a market rate price. And so that might not necessarily be the most affordable for lower income individuals. It might be more affordable. Like, so it might be increasing rent supply for maybe people who are higher income, depending on the location of these short-term rentals.
What about opportunities for ownership? When you guys were doing your research, did you come across any discussion of that? Because I know there's a lot of ideas about, allowing people to rent to own their apartment buildings. And then again, going back to what I asked about existing communities, I mean, the key here is she who controls the land. That's really what this is all about, is who owns the real estate. So what sorts of things could public agencies do to incentivize more ownership among these folks that are already here?
I think maybe higher penalizations for corporate landlord entities. I think the issue is that for a lot of California residents in general, I mean, we've lost a lot of our financial autonomy. With so many people living paycheck to paycheck and their largest expense being their rent time and time again, the chance of even us being in our 20s, of us owning homes anytime soon, unless we come into some crazy money, is pretty slim. So I think that there needs to be more safeguards put on corporate landlord groups like Invitation Homes, preventing them from encroaching on, lots that are designated to be affordable housing or in zones that have affordable housing.
I'm going to share something with you guys that I may have mentioned when we talked earlier. Did I mention the California Organized Insurance Network, or COIN? That's something, when you get a chance, you can take a look. But that was the insurance industry's response to something called the Community Reinvestment Act, which came across, I think, in the 90s, when Congresswoman Waters and some other people said, hey, banks are taking advantage of these communities, so you need to set aside a certain amount of resources for first-time home buyers, et cetera, so small business loans, so forth. So the insurance industry, they didn't want to do the CRA thing, so they did some sort of voluntary program where they had a certain amount of millions, if not billions of dollars set aside in Sacramento that is supposed to fund affordable housing, maybe first-time home buyers. But I think in addition to, disincentivizing the corporate stuff, there may be some things that can be done to, require them to do something positive with all those coins they're vacuuming up from all our pockets.
So he's gonna take care of the financial side. You mentioned that SB 10, if, first of all, there's no affordability, but what do you think if we had a bill like SB 10 that allowed small lot subdivisions with smaller units, more than the lot splits they're doing now in SB 9? And there was a requirement that there be affordability of home ownership required, so that they cannot be used for rentals, but must be for sale, for purchase for those who otherwise, like yourselves, when you graduate, would not be able to afford what we consider a traditional home in Los Angeles. Big lot, big house, big price. Do you think that that would assist those areas that are being gentrified and allow more homeownership opportunities?
I think that'd be a really good solution, especially in areas like South Central, Crenshaw, all of those areas. I think that the key proponent of all of this is the fact that, like, if the bills don't have the language enforcing the fact that the housing must be affordable, then the ball is essentially at the court of landowners and landlords to essentially emphasize profit over people. And so I think that changing SB 10 to make it actually require affordable housing, the implementation of it would be a lot more positive for lower income people.
I'm just going to point out the obvious. You have a lot of legislators that have progressive ideals, and that's what they
Yeah.
sell us on. And some of their biggest campaign contributors are invitation homes.
Big real estate.
It's a dichotomy, it's a conflict. We're aware of the realities of, that's a whole different research project, but we agree with you. That's a good point. My next question for you was, that we have the TOC and the density bonus under SB 1818 that allow for bonuses. I'm very surprised to see that the TOC, I believe, we're creating more affordable homes than the density bonuses, 1818. Because we have a large amount that are coming in at low income, that's because the provision of 11% of the housing units, in order to get the bonuses, they work it out financially. What's the lowest amount of percentage of units we should provide to get the greatest amount of bonuses? So that whole system, I've always believed, and I believe John agrees with me, needs to be revamped. But while you're looking at those bonuses, and you're talking about how we incentivize and how Boston did not have inclusionary zoning that produced as much affordable housing because of the incentives. Is there anything else that you believe would help incentivize, other than these bonuses, creation of affordable housing, whether it's a social housing model or something else that you came across in your research?
I think that rent control is especially a really important solution for tackling that. I think that there's definitely a certain level of uncertainty that renters have. I mean, with the way that inflation has been soaring, like everybody's rent is skyrocketing. So I just think having that peace of mind would probably incentivize people to save money and eventually move towards homeownership.
Good. Next question is related. What do you think would help our, you know what the RENA numbers are? And the RENA is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment.
RHNA.
Right, called RENA, and that is in a cycle of so many years. That's our housing element. So the state says, as part of these bills that Scott Wiener and his group passed, says, here's what your region has to produce of market rate and affordable units. And there's two different categories, that's it. And based on what we've seen and what we know in the city, we're going to produce enough market rate. We are not producing enough we're not gonna meet our goals. There are some serious things that happen if we don't, but we're not gonna meet them. So what do you think we could do to help our city to reach our RENA, our Regional Housing Needs Assessment number, our goal for only affordable housing units? What are we not considering that we should to get that number up?
Are there any like present day mechanisms of incentivizing landowners to construct affordable housing units?
The TOC, SB 1818, which is the state density bonus, and as part of our new housing element in our new zoning code that's being passed by area, we're doing incentive zones that are not near transportation. They are not in the TOC areas and would not normally get them. And we are starting a new incentive program that, again, the developer could pay a fee. It's going to go into a housing trust fund. And in return, they can build higher, they can build denser, which is more apartment buildings in areas that they otherwise wouldn't. So that is starting in the downtown area. Unfortunately, the area they're incentivizing is a high number of single family residences that are particularly the Black community, where people otherwise wouldn't have been able to buy a house. So you've got, we're gonna incentivize, but we're gonna wipe out the single family home ownership in that area.
And keep in mind too, this isn't just about construction, because there's a lot of existing units that if the owners and landlords were willing to accept Section 8 vouchers, for example, that could be someone who's formerly homeless, for example, if they have a voucher that could be housed. But there's a stigma that a lot of landlords have about, so-called Section 8 renters.
Well, if they call my phone number and somebody turned on Section 8, I'm sick of everything I got.
Exactly.
We need to talk about it if they, you accept Section 8.
Right.
Period.
So for our homelessness expert, thank you for your presentation too. I wanted to make sure we touched on that topic. Do you and others have any ideas about, we know about the housing first model, but what other sorts of things are required, since you mentioned that statistic about how few people rather are actually finding permanent housing between Inside Safe and I think Roomkey has a slightly higher rate. But what sort of things did you come across that you thought would increase the chances of people staying housed permanently?
I came across Section 8 vouchers, which was mentioned pretty frequently, but the problem is the timing. So people had vouchers, but they weren't able to find housing soon enough. Specifically, they were looking, for my other job, I do research and people that live within the projects in San Pedro. And a lot of the times once they have the opportunity of, okay, I can leave here and I have a voucher that's gonna help me somewhere else, they wanna move to a nicer area which is subjective, right? And a lot of times they try to, but it has to do with the timing. They don't have enough time to find
So it's being able to manipulate within the system.
yeah.
And from a lot of people, just getting the information and all the paperwork that you need in and of itself.
That's another thing too, I would say, is that individuals don't have they have the access to the resources, but I would say the guidance. You have to take into consideration the education level of people living within projects, people utilizing Section 8 vouchers, right? It's not, a lot of the times they have high school diplomas, that's their max. Community college, that's their max, and they don't have the knowledge needed to understand how to work through the paperwork, how to talk to someone that understands where they're coming from. Especially if you're considering people that are just Spanish speakers or immigrants and they have a fear of their losing their status or getting deported. I would say just being able to have someone to provide guidance and having more case management would be productive.
Yeah, there's a lot of well-lettered people that couldn't figure out a lot of this stuff, so it's keeping it simple is definitely key. And also the example of what they're doing in Austin, where everything is in one place.
They have a low cost of land. I've met with Austin's Mayor. I've been on a lot of meetings with him, and they're doing it. By the way, their numbers are through the roof now as far as housing. I believe they're considering it completely. The totality of their homeless, I believe, as of a month and a half ago, were housed. But they admit their cost of land, their cost of construction, and the vast amount of land that they have that's available has really changed things for them. San Antonio also has done amazing work. We talk at the mayor's office about it. Their pyramid structure differs from ours. And that you can read about it every time. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. We know it's not working. Did you have more questions? Because I wanted to kind of ask a final question.
We got lots of questions, but I know we don't have a lot of time.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask each of you, if you could tell John and I briefly, what is it that you would like to do when you graduate college? What do you see yourself doing in about 5 or 10 years?
So I plan to go straight from undergrad to law school, hopefully on the East Coast. I'm still trying to figure out what discipline of law interests me. As of right now, the practice areas I'm kind of drawn to: civil rights law, immigration law, and just things within the public interest sector.
For me, the plan right now is when I graduate to possibly go into government service, specifically with foreign affairs. And like, I've thought about going to law school, but it's definitely not something I'll go straight into right after I graduate. So
I actually just finished applying for PhD programs in health policy research. So I would love to lead research efforts via PI for research projects that focus on mitigating health disparities within marginalized communities.
I hope you go to law school, and then I'm very interested in criminal justice reform. And so I kind of want to make that the focus of my career. So I'm very interested in like policy initiatives towards that goal, but then also working for like legal nonprofits in order to defend people who might be trying to get appeals or things like that.
I would like to invite you, as you go through your educational process, each and every one of you, to please stay in touch with John and I, just on a personal level. I'm really impressed, and I'd like to hear that you succeed with your goals.
Absolutely.
And thank you for your work. You did a great job.
And also, as you proceed, just keep in mind what it is that has you, excited and energized and passionate about law school, being a researcher or a PhD, and focus on that. Because it's easy, as you guys probably know, to get distracted and lost. And, you go to law schools and people are chasing the big firm jobs. Unless that's what you really are interested in, focus on what it is you're trying to do. And lead to success.
You guys did a great job.